You know that moment on a Sunday night when you're lying in bed and your brain just refuses to shut off? Not because you're excited about something, but because Monday is coming. The alarm is already set, the same commute, the same desk, the same inbox full of things that somehow feel both urgent and completely meaningless at the same time. And somewhere in the middle of that restless half sleep, a thought creeps in, a quiet one, almost embarrassing, like you don't want to say it out loud. Is this it? Is this just what life is now? I've had that thought more times than I'd like to admit. My name is Adam, and honestly, I spent way too many years obsessing over one specific question. Why do some people manage to walk away from the whole grind in their 30s without ever having been doctors or lawyers or some tech guy who got lucky with stock options, while most people are still counting down to 65 like it's a prison sentence? Because here's what messed with my head when I started digging into this. The people who retire early aren't always the highest earners in the room. Sometimes they're nowhere close. I have a friend, Lewis. Average salary his whole working life. Nothing flashy, no inheritance, no side hustle that blew up overnight. And this guy is on track to be done, genuinely done, by 38. Not done as in sitting on a beach doing nothing. Done as in choosing what he does every single day. That's a different kind of wealth that most people never even think about. So what I want to do today is pull back the curtain on how this actually works. Not the fantasy version, not the just drink less coffee and you'll save $1 million version. That's honestly a little insulting. The real version. The version that requires some honesty with yourself, a few shifts in how you think about money, and a plan that doesn't need you to be rich to work. The number most people never calculate. Okay, so here's where we have to start, and I promise this is more interesting than it sounds. Most people think about retirement as an age, like I'll retire at 65. But that framing is the first thing that needs to change, because retirement isn't really an age, it's a number. Specifically, it's the point where your savings and investments generate enough passive income to cover your living expenses forever. That's it. That's the whole game. There's a concept in the financial independence world called the 4% rule. The idea is simple. If you build up a portfolio large enough that you can withdraw 4% of it each year to live on, and your investments are growing at a healthy rate, statistically, your money will outlast you. You're done working not because you hit some age, but because your money is doing the working for you. So, what does that mean in real numbers? It means if your annual living expenses are, say, $30,000 a year. And yes, we'll talk about how to actually get your expenses that low without living miserably. Then you need a portfolio of roughly $750,000 to retire. You take 4% of $750,000 and you get $30,000. That covers your year. You don't touch the principal. In theory, you never run out. Now, I know what you're thinking. Adam, $750,000 sounds like a lot of money. And yeah, it is. But here's the thing. It is significantly less than the $2 million or $3 million figure that gets thrown around when people talk about retirement. And the reason the number is lower is because your lifestyle expenses are lower, which brings us to the second piece of this puzzle. The goal isn't to earn more so you can spend more. The goal is to find out what kind of life actually makes you happy and then build exactly that life as cheaply as you can without compromising the things that actually matter to you. The number most people never calculate. Okay, so here's where we have to start, and I promise this is more interesting than it sounds. Most people think about retirement as an age, like I'll retire at 65. But that framing is the first thing that needs to change, because retirement isn't really an age, it's a number. Specifically, it's the point where your savings and investments generate enough passive income to cover your living expenses forever. That's it. That's the whole game. There's a concept in the financial independence world called the 4% rule. The idea is simple. If you build up a portfolio large enough that you can withdraw 4% of it each year to live on, and your investments are growing at a healthy rate, statistically, your money will outlast you. You're done working not because you hit some age, but because your money is doing the working for you. So, what does that mean in real numbers? It means if your annual living expenses are, say, $30,000 a year. And yes, we'll talk about how to actually get your expenses that low without living miserably. Then you need a portfolio of roughly $750,000 to retire. You take 4% of $750,000 and you get $30,000. That covers your year. You don't touch the principal. In theory, you never run out. Now, I know what you're thinking. Adam, $750,000 sounds like a lot of money. And yeah, it is. But here's the thing. It is significantly less than the $2 million or $3 million figure that gets thrown around when people talk about retirement. And the reason the number is lower is because your lifestyle expenses are lower, which brings us to the second piece of this puzzle. The goal isn't to earn more so you can spend more. The goal is to find out what kind of life actually makes you happy and then build exactly that life as cheaply as you can without compromising the things that actually matter to you. The savings rate is the real cheat code. Here's the thing that completely rewired how I think about this. The single most powerful lever in the early retirement equation isn't how much you earn, it's the gap between what you earn and what you spend, your savings rate. Let me give you a quick mental image. Imagine two people. Person A earns $80,000 a year and saves 10% of it. Person B earns $45,000 a year and saves 40% of it. Who do you think retires first? It's person B. Not even close. Because when you save 40% of your income, you're not just building wealth faster, you're also proving that you can live on 60% of your income, which means your retirement number is naturally lower because you need less to sustain your lifestyle. It's this beautiful double effect that most people completely miss because they're focused on the earning side and ignoring the spending side entirely. Now, getting to a 40% savings rate on an average income sounds brutal, but I want to be honest with you. It usually doesn't require giving up the things you love. It requires being ruthless about the things you don't actually love but are paying for anyway. Lewis, my friend I mentioned earlier, he went through his bank statements one afternoon and found something wild. He was spending about $400 a month on subscriptions and memberships he'd basically forgotten about. A gym he hadn't been to in 4 months, 2 streaming platforms he'd signed up for free trials and never canceled, a meal kit service he used 3 times. That's nearly $5,000 a year on things that were contributing zero to his actual happiness. That's not a spending problem, that's an attention problem. And once he paid attention, the fix was painless. The actionable thing here is embarrassingly simple, but almost nobody does it. Print out your last 3 months of bank and credit card statements, go line by line, and highlight every transaction that you either don't remember making or wouldn't make again today. That pile of highlighted transactions is your first source of savings rate fuel. Where the real money lives: housing, cars, and food. If you want to actually move the needle on your savings rate, you have to be willing to look at the big 3. Because small stuff, the daily coffee, the slightly more expensive shampoo, that's not where the game is won or lost. Housing, transportation, and food are responsible for about 70% of most people's budgets, so that's where the real leverage is. Housing first, because it's the biggest one. The default move in most people's minds is to buy the nicest home they can qualify for. And look, I'm not saying homeownership is wrong, but a lot of people stretch into a mortgage that eats 35, 40, even 45% of their take-home pay, and then wonder why they can never get ahead. The early retirement crowd tends to do one of a few things. They buy a smaller home than they can afford, they house hack, which means renting out a room or a unit to offset the mortgage, or they stay in a lower cost of living area intentionally, even when they could afford to upgrade. None of these feel glamorous, but here's the reframe. A house that costs you 20% of your income instead of 40% is the difference between retiring at 38 or never retiring at all. That's not an exaggeration. Cars are the sneaky one, because unlike a house, a car almost never goes up in value. It just bleeds money. The payment, the insurance, the maintenance, the depreciation, it adds up to a staggering amount over a decade. A lot of early retirees drive used, reliable, boring cars. Not because they hate nice things, but because they've made a very conscious trade. A nicer car today means more years in the office tomorrow, and they decided that trade isn't worth it. Food is interesting because it's actually the easiest one to change without feeling deprived. Cooking at home more often, meal prepping, not wasting food, these things can realistically save a couple $100s a month for most people. And unlike cutting your housing costs, which is a major life decision, cooking more is something you can literally start tomorrow. Your income is a tool. Sharpen it. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about cutting spending, and I want to be clear, that's not the whole story. Because at some point, you can only cut so much. And the other side of the equation is income, and specifically, growing it. Now, I'm not going to tell you to just get a higher paying job, like that's some obvious thing everyone can do. But I do want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention: the skill premium. Most careers have a huge gap between what someone with average performance earns and what someone who's exceptional at their craft can earn. And the people who close that gap tend to do it not by working longer hours, but by deliberately developing skills that the market rewards more. What does that look like practically? It might be taking an online course in something that's in demand in your industry. It might be building a portfolio that shows what you can do rather than just listing credentials. It might be asking for a raise you've been avoiding asking for, because genuinely, a lot of people just don't ask. Research consistently shows people who advocate for their compensation earn significantly more over a lifetime than equally skilled people who don't. And then there's the side income conversation. Not because you need to become an entrepreneur or build a passive income empire overnight, but because an extra $500 to $1,000 a month consistently invested over several years is genuinely transformative when compounded. That could be freelancing in your current skill set, selling something, teaching something. Whatever it is, the key word is consistent. Little, reliably, for a long time beats a lot, inconsistently, every single time. Boring works better than clever. This is the part where people tend to overcomplicate things, so I'm going to try to be as clear as possible. The investment strategy for early retirement doesn't need to be sophisticated. In fact, the evidence pretty strongly suggests that simple is better. The basic framework is this: invest consistently into low-cost index funds that track the broader stock market, and leave it alone. That's it. Seriously. An index fund basically buys a tiny slice of hundreds or thousands of companies at once, so you're not betting on any single stock. The costs are low because no one's picking stocks, it just follows the market. And historically, the stock market has returned roughly 7 to 10% per year on average after inflation. Over 10 or 15 years, that's the kind of compounding that genuinely changes your life. The temptation is to do something smarter, to time the market, to pick the hot stock, to find the thing that's going to 10x. But the data on this is pretty humbling. The overwhelming majority of professional fund managers, people who do this full time with all the resources in the world, underperform simple index funds over long periods. So the amateur trying to beat the market is usually just adding risk and complexity without the upside. What matters more than picking the right investment is picking the right behavior. Investing a fixed amount every single month regardless of whether the market is up or down. Not panic selling when the market drops. Not changing your strategy every time a new trend comes along. The boring discipline of contributing consistently and leaving it alone is genuinely more valuable than any investment insight. The psychological game is the hardest part. And this is the part nobody really talks about. Because all the math we've gone through today, the savings rates, the 4% rule, the index funds, it's not actually complicated. Any reasonably smart person can understand it in an afternoon. So why aren't more people doing it? Because the hardest part of this journey isn't financial, it's psychological. There are a few mental traps that kill early retirement dreams before they even get started. The first one is lifestyle inflation. You get a raise, or a promotion, or life just gets a little more comfortable, and almost automatically spending rises to meet it. The new car, the bigger apartment, the nicer restaurants, none of it is bad on its own, but if your expenses scale with every income increase, you never actually gain ground. You're just running faster on the same treadmill. The second trap is comparison, And this one is brutal in the age of social media, because you're surrounded by curated images of people who appear to be living much larger than you, and your brain has a hard time distinguishing between this person is genuinely wealthier than me and this person is spending more than they have to look wealthier than they are. Both look identical on Instagram, but one is building freedom and the other is building debt. Lewis told me something once that stuck with me. He said the moment things started to click for him was when he stopped caring whether his financial life looked impressive and started caring whether it was actually working. That's a shift that sounds simple but takes real mental effort to make. The third trap is delayed starting. I'll get serious about this when I earn more. I'll start investing when I have more to invest. Every month that passes is compounding you don't get back. A $200 monthly investment at 25 will be worth roughly twice as much at 60 as the same investment started at 35. Time is the one resource you genuinely cannot buy back. What does life actually look like after? Because I think it's worth spending a minute on this, because retiring before 40 as a concept can sound kind of empty. Like, what are you even doing with yourself? And the answer is deeply personal, but I'll tell you what most people in the space actually end up doing. They're not sitting on a beach doing nothing, or at least not forever. Most of them end up doing work, but work they actually chose. They travel, they start passion projects, they spend more time with family. They take on consulting work in their field because they want to, not because they have to. They volunteer, they garden, they learn languages or instruments or skills they never had time for. The point of early retirement isn't to stop being productive. It's to reclaim your time so that productivity is on your terms. That's it. And honestly, that goal, having your time be yours, is worth building toward even if you never fully retire in the traditional sense. Even getting to a place where you have 2 years of living expenses saved gives you an incredible amount of freedom and negotiating power in your career. You can take risks. You can walk away from situations that aren't right for you. You can say no. That freedom has value even before you hit the finish line. So let's bring this back to where we started. That Sunday night feeling, the restlessness, the quiet, slightly embarrassing thought that maybe there's another way. There is, and it doesn't require being born into the right family, or earning a ridiculous salary, or finding some secret investment that nobody else knows about. It requires understanding that your savings rate is more powerful than your income level. It requires being honest about what you're spending money on and whether it's actually making your life better. It requires investing simply and consistently in things that grow over time. And more than anything, it requires deciding that your time, the actual hours of your life, is worth protecting. That last part sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but most of us act like our time is the cheap thing, and the stuff we buy with our money is the valuable thing. Early retirement is basically just flipping that equation around. I want to leave you with something Lewis said to me when he was explaining all of this years ago, before I'd really thought seriously about any of it. He said, "Adam, most people spend the first half of their life sacrificing their health for money, and the second half spending that money trying to get their health back. I don't want to do that. I haven't been able to shake that, and I hope you can't either. Start where you are. Use what you have. Make the small decisions consistently, and give yourself permission to want a life that's actually yours. The math works. The question is whether you're willing to do the work on the mindset." See you in the next one.